boss underestimated the poor intern, but she saved the company days later. Michael Johnson adjusted his imported silk tie as he watched the new intern enter the Johnson Imports building, the family business he had run for 10 years in downtown New York City. The 22-year-old walked hesitantly across the marble lobby, carrying a worn synthetic leather briefcase and wearing a simple brown blouse that betrayed her humble origins. When Jasmine Williams was called to introduce herself in the executive boardroom, Michael didn't even look up from the papers on his mahogany desk. The laughter that echoed through the room made her pause at the door, watching the 40-year-old man gesturing animatedly to the other executives present. "Look what they sent us now," Michael said, still laughing, pointing at Jasmine without even looking directly at her. "Another one of these poor girls wanting a chance. I bet she doesn't even know how to use a computer properly." The other men in suits laughed along, as if it were a rehearsed joke. Jasmine felt her face grow hot, but kept her posture straight. She had come from the South Bronx, on the south side of New York City, after taking 2 packed buses and an overcrowded subway. Her black synthetic leather shoes were patched on the side, a hand-me-down from her older cousin who had secured her this opportunity through a social program. "Mr. Johnson?" She tried to get his attention, keeping her voice steady. "Oh, you can talk." Michael finally looked at her, but his eyes quickly skimmed over her face, focusing on the borrowed uniform. "Let me guess. Public school. Lives in the projects and thinks she's going to revolutionize our company with her brilliant ideas, right?" Jasmine swallowed her pride. She needed this job. Her mother, Mrs. Patricia, had uncontrolled diabetes and needed expensive medication. Her father, Mr. Harold, worked as a night shift doorman, and their combined salaries barely covered the family's expenses. "I'm here to learn and work, sir," she replied simply. "Good, good," Michael waved dismissively. "Because this isn't child's play. This company moves millions every month. We've been importing electronics from Asia for 3 generations. It's no place for the unprepared." What Michael didn't know was that Johnson Imports was facing its worst crisis in decades. Debts were piling up like a silent avalanche. Asian suppliers were threatening to cut contracts, and banks were pressing for overdue payments. But he kept up the facade of success, driving his imported Lexus and wearing designer clothes to hide the growing desperation. Jasmine was shown to her desk, a small space in the corner of the office near the filing room. Her job would be organizing documents and making coffee for meetings. Robert Thompson, the head accountant and Michael's best friend since business school, eyed her suspiciously as she passed his desk. "Hope you know your place," Robert murmured, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. "Everyone here has their role." In her first days, Jasmine observed everything in silence. She always arrived 15 minutes early and left after everyone else. During lunch, when other employees went to nearby restaurants, she stayed at her desk, eating a sandwich from home, using the time to study the company's processes. It was during one of these observations that she noticed something odd about the numbers Robert presented in meetings. The figures didn't match the documents she filed. But when she discreetly asked the veteran secretary, Mrs. Barbara, the 60-year-old woman just shook her head. "Sweetheart, around here, those who ask too many questions don't last long," Barbara whispered, glancing around to make sure no one heard. "I've worked here 20 years. I've seen good people get fired for much less." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, Jasmine's first week ended with a crucial meeting. Asian investors had come all the way from Shanghai to discuss a $1 million contract that could save the company. Michael was visibly nervous, sweating despite the icy air conditioning in the meeting room. Jasmine was assigned to serve coffee and water during the meeting. Her steps were careful on the expensive carpet, trying not to make noise as Robert presented complex spreadsheets in English to the visitors. That's when she noticed a serious error in the calculations projected on the screen. The import numbers were wrong. Robert had multiplied the exchange rate by an incorrect value, artificially inflating the expected profits. If the contract was signed based on those numbers, the company would lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. Her heart raced. She had to say something, but how? She waited for Robert to finish an explanation and discreetly approached Michael, who was at the head of the table. "Mr. Johnson," she whispered, leaning in to place a cup of coffee beside him. "There's a mistake in the spreadsheet numbers." "What?" Michael turned sharply, his voice echoing through the silent room. The Asian investors stopped talking and looked their way. "The exchange rate calculations are—" "Are you interrupting me?" Michael's voice rose. "During a meeting with international investors." The silence in the room was heavy. Jasmine felt every eye on her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the tray. "I just wanted—" "You just wanted what? To give your opinion on matters you don't understand?" Michael stood from his chair, his imposing height making Jasmine step back. "You're an intern. Your job is to serve coffee, not comment on numbers far beyond your understanding." Robert smiled smugly, adjusting the papers on the table. The Asian investors exchanged uncomfortable glances, but said nothing. "Go back to your desk and don't interrupt me again." Michael pointed to the door. "And next time, remember your place here." Jasmine left the room, her cheeks burning with shame and anger. Mrs. Barbara, who had witnessed everything through the glass door, shook her head in pity. It wasn't the first time she'd seen Michael publicly humiliate an employee. Back at her desk, Jasmine couldn't focus. The error in the spreadsheet still bothered her. Those wrong numbers could ruin the company she was trying to help. But who would believe a poor intern over the chief accountant? For the rest of the afternoon, she watched Robert chatting animatedly with Michael in the office. Through the glass wall, she could see the two men celebrating something, probably the success of the meeting. But Jasmine knew that celebration was premature. At the end of the workday, when everyone had left, she stayed behind organizing old files. That's when she found older spreadsheets from previous months, tucked away in a dusty folder. Her eyes widened as she compared the numbers. The discrepancies weren't recent. Robert had been manipulating data for months, always inflating results to make the company seem more profitable than it really was. And Michael, blinded by trust in his friend, had no idea he was being deceived. "Still here, girl?" Jasmine turned, startled. It was Mr. Walter, the 70-year-old night security guard who'd worked in the building for decades. "Sorry, Mr. Walter. I was just finishing organizing—" "No need to apologize." The man smiled kindly. "Hard workers like you, we don't see every day. I get here at 7 in the evening, and you're still here. I leave at 6 in the morning, and you've already arrived." "I need this job," Jasmine admitted, tucking the papers into her folder. "I understand, dear, I have a family to support too, but be careful not to overwork yourself. I've seen too many good people get sick from working too hard." Jasmine smiled gratefully and got ready to leave. But before she walked out, she glanced one more time at the spreadsheets she'd uncovered. Maybe there was a way to prove she was right without causing more trouble for herself. The next morning, she arrived even earlier. Mrs. Barbara was the first employee to arrive and was surprised to find Jasmine already working. "Sweetheart, did you sleep here?" the secretary asked, concerned. "No, Mrs. Barbara. I just came in early to get ahead on work." Mrs. Barbara studied the young woman for a moment. There was something in Jasmine's determination that reminded her of herself when she was younger. Before working as a secretary, she'd been an accountant for 15 years. She had a trained eye for numbers and had already noticed some inconsistencies in Robert's work, but never dared to question them. "Jasmine," she whispered, stepping closer to the desk. "Can I give you some advice?" "Of course, Mrs. Barbara." "I've worked here a long time, I've seen a lot. If you've noticed something off with the numbers, you're not imagining it. But be careful what you do. Robert and Michael are very close." Jasmine felt a mix of relief and worry. So she wasn't imagining things. But if Mrs. Barbara, with all her experience, hadn't done anything about it, maybe it really was dangerous to get involved. Over the rest of the week, the tension in the company grew noticeably. Constant calls from suppliers demanding overdue payments, closed-door meetings between Michael and Robert, and employees whispering concerns about possible layoffs. It was on Friday that the bomb dropped. The company's main supplier, responsible for 60% of imports, called Michael directly to cancel the contract. Payments were 3 months late, and they couldn't wait any longer. Michael hung up the phone and stood frozen for long minutes, staring at the device as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Robert walked into the office just then, finding his friend pale and sweating. "What happened?" Robert asked, closing the door behind him. "Eastern Trade cancelled our contract," Michael murmured. 3 generations doing business with them, Robert. 3 generations. Calm down, Michael. We'll figure it out. We always do. How? How do we fix a $2 million debt? Michael exploded, slamming his fist on the desk. The banks are on our backs, the employees need to be paid, and now we've lost our main supplier. Jasmine, who was organizing files in a nearby room, overheard the argument through the wall. $2 million in debt. Now she understood why Robert had been manipulating the numbers. He was trying to hide the company's real situation. Robert ran a hand through his graying hair, nervous. He needed to keep Michael calm while he thought of a solution. For months, he'd been transferring small amounts from the company to personal accounts, justifying them as temporary loans. But now, with the crisis exposed, it was only a matter of time before someone discovered the discrepancies. "Listen," Robert moved closer to his friend. "I have a contact who can help us. A group of investors who buy struggling businesses. They can inject enough capital to get us out of this. And in return, they take 40% of the company. But it's better than losing everything, isn't it?" Michael was desperate enough to accept any offer. Johnson Imports was more than just a business to him. It was the legacy of his grandfather, Mr. William Johnson, who had started with a small shop in the garment district and built the empire that Michael now saw crumbling. Meanwhile, Jasmine continued working quietly, but now with a different purpose. During her breaks, she combed through old documents, trying to pinpoint exactly when the problems had begun. And what she discovered was even worse than she had imagined. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. The suspicious transfers by Robert had begun 2 years ago, right after the company received a major bank loan for expansion. The money that should have been invested in new products and infrastructure had been gradually siphoned off. Robert had created a complex web of excuses and fake documents to cover up the theft. Jasmine discreetly photographed the most important documents with her old phone. She knew she needed concrete proof before making any accusations. A poor intern accusing the head accountant of theft would be seen as desperation or jealousy. The following Monday, Robert showed up with a miracle proposal. The investors he had mentioned were willing to inject $5 million into the company, but they needed a quick answer. Michael, seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, was ready to sign anything. "They want a meeting this afternoon," Robert said, placing a contract on Michael's desk. "It's our only chance." Jasmine, who was organizing the afternoon schedule, noticed something odd about Robert's urgency. Those mysterious investors had appeared at the most desperate moment. It was too convenient to be a coincidence. During lunch, when everyone had left, she took the opportunity to examine the contract Robert had left on Michael's desk. Her blood ran cold as she read the clauses. Those men weren't investors. They were loan sharks in disguise, offering money at astronomical interest rates that would make repayment impossible. If Michael signed that contract, the company would be doomed. Within 6 months, he'd be forced to sell everything to pay off a debt that would grow exponentially. And Robert, as the accountant, would pocket a hefty commission for brokering the deal. Jasmine knew she had to act. But how? Michael had made it clear he didn't want to hear her opinions, and Robert would certainly deny any accusation. Then she had an idea. She remembered the connections she'd made during her accounting studies. Yes, she had a college degree, but she hid that fact just to get any job. Brian Miller, her former classmate, now worked at an auditing firm. Maybe he could help. During her afternoon break, she called Brian from a payphone on the street. "Jasmine? Wow, it's been ages. How are you?" "Hi, Brian. Listen, I need a favor. Do you still work in auditing?" "Yeah, I do. Why?" "I have evidence of fraud at a company, but I need someone credible to review the documents. Could you take a look?" Brian was intrigued. Jasmine had always been one of the top students in their class, with a sharp eye for spotting accounting irregularities. "Of course, email me the documents and I'll review them today." Jasmine rushed to a nearby internet cafe and sent the photos of the documents she had gathered. Brian promised an answer by the end of the day. When she returned to the office, the meeting with the so-called investors had already begun. Through the glass wall, she could see three men in expensive suits talking with Michael and Robert. One of them had scars on his face and an intimidating demeanor that didn't match a legitimate businessman. Mrs. Barbara was visibly nervous, glancing repeatedly toward the meeting room. "I didn't like those men at all," she whispered to Jasmine. "There's something wrong with this story." At 5 in the afternoon, Jasmine's phone buzzed. It was a message from Brian. "Urgent. Call me now." She quickly left the building and called again from the payphone. "Jasmine, where did you get these documents?" Brian's voice was tense. "Why? What did you find?" "This is a full-blown audit case. Systematic fraud, data manipulation, money laundering. The person responsible could get up to 10 years in prison." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. And there's more. These documents you sent me prove someone's been embezzling money for 2 years. If the company doesn't act fast, it'll go bankrupt in a matter of weeks." Jasmine's stomach twisted. The situation was even worse than she'd imagined. And at that very moment, Michael was probably signing the contract with the loan sharks, thinking he was saving the company. "Brian, can you do me another favor? Can you come here right now and present these findings to the company's owner?" "I can. I'll clear my schedule for tomorrow and head over." "No, it has to be today. Now I think in an hour it might be too late." The urgency in Jasmine's voice convinced Brian. He grabbed his car keys and immediately drove toward downtown New York City. When Jasmine returned to the office, she found Michael beaming in the conference room. The contract had been signed, and the three men were leaving with satisfied smiles. Robert was enthusiastically congratulating Michael as if they'd just closed the deal of the century. $5 million, Michael announced for everyone to hear. "We're going to get through this crisis." The employees clapped, relieved. No one knew that contract was actually a death sentence for the company. Jasmine had to act fast. Michael was too euphoric to listen to criticism, but maybe Mrs. Barbara could help. The seasoned secretary had the boss's trust and could intervene. "Mrs. Barbara," she approached discreetly, "I need to speak with Mr. Johnson about something urgent regarding the company." "Dear, he's celebrating. It's not a good time. It's about the numbers I tried to show him last week. I've uncovered serious issues." Mrs. Barbara glanced around, making sure Robert wasn't listening. "What kind of issues?" "Embezzlement, data tampering. The company's been robbed for 2 years." Mrs. Barbara's eyes widened. She'd always suspected something was off, but she never imagined the scale of the problem. "Do you have proof?" "I do. And a certified accountant who can confirm everything. He's on his way here now." Mrs. Barbara took a deep breath. After 20 years working for the Johnson family, she felt it was her duty to protect the company. "I'll try to talk to him. But if you're wrong..." "I'm not wrong, Mrs. Barbara. I'm absolutely certain." As Mrs. Barbara headed toward Michael's office, Jasmine saw Brian arriving in the building's lobby. She rushed down to meet him and explain the situation. "The company just signed a deal with loan sharks," she said breathlessly. "The head accountant has been embezzling money for 2 years, and the owner has no idea." Brian held the folder with the analyzed documents. "Let's go up. I need to speak with this businessman immediately." When they reached Johnson Imports' floor, they found Michael yelling at Mrs. Barbara in the middle of the office. Robert stood beside him, looking smug. "How dare you suggest I don't know what I'm doing?" Michael shouted. 20 years working here doesn't give you the right to question my decisions." "Mr. Johnson," Mrs. Barbara tried to explain, visibly shaken. "I just think you should hear what Jasmine has to say." "The intern?" Michael turned, spotting Jasmine and Brian approaching. "Now even the new hire is questioning my competence." "Mr. Johnson," Brian introduced himself, extending his hand. "My name is Brian Miller. I'm a certified accountant and auditor. I need to speak with you about serious irregularities in your company." Michael looked at Brian with suspicion. The young man was well-dressed and carried a professional briefcase, clearly not just another armchair critic, as he called those who questioned his decisions. "Irregularities?" Robert cut in nervously. "What kind of irregularities?" Brian opened his briefcase and placed the documents on the table. "Systematic embezzlement, Manipulated financial records, fake accounts, all documented here. Robert's face turned pale. Michael picked up the papers and began examining them, his expression shifting gradually from irritation to disbelief. These are our documents, Michael murmured. They are, Brian confirmed, and they prove someone has been stealing from your company for 2 years. The total amounts to over $800,000 diverted. Michael turned to Robert, who was trying to keep his composure, but was visibly shaken. Robert, can you explain this? Michael, this guy shows up out of nowhere with documents that could be forged. You're going to believe him over me? The documents are authentic, Brian interrupted. In fact, I have information that today you signed a contract with loan sharks posing as legitimate investors. Michael felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. How did this stranger know about the contract he had signed just minutes ago? How do you know that? Brian pointed at Jasmine. Because your intern spotted the scam before it went through. She called me to review the documents because she knew something was wrong. All eyes turned to Jasmine, who stood silently at the back of the room. Michael stared at her with a mix of confusion and disbelief. You? He said, as if struggling to process the information. Mr. Johnson, Jasmine finally spoke, her voice steady despite her nerves. I tried to warn you about the errors in the spreadsheet last week. When you humiliated me in front of the Asian investors, I decided to investigate on my own. Investigate? Robert exploded. Who do you think you are to investigate anything here? I'm a certified accountant, Jasmine said calmly, bringing a deathly silence to the room. I graduated with honors from NYU Business School. I hid my degree because I knew I wouldn't even get an interview if they knew I was educated. Poor people with degrees scare them even more than poor people without one. Michael was stunned. The intern he had dismissed and humiliated was actually more qualified than most of his employees. Why didn't you say something sooner? Because you don't even look at my face when you talk to me, Jasmine replied, her voice heavy with restrained hurt. To you, I'm just another poor girl trying to act smart. Robert, seeing the situation slipping away, made one last desperate move. Michael, this is ridiculous. She's trying to frame me because she's jealous of my position. It's obvious that... Obvious what? Brian cut in, placing more documents on the table. That the transfers to your personal accounts are a coincidence? That the fake receipts appeared by magic? Robert looked at the papers and realized he was cornered. Every transaction was documented there, organized chronologically by Jasmine and analyzed professionally by Brian. I can explain, Robert stammered. Can you explain how you stole $800,000 from your best friend's company? Michael had found his voice again, and it was shaking with anger. How could you look me in the eye for 2 years knowing you were ruining me? It was just a loan. Robert tried to defend himself. I was going to pay it all back. With what money? Brian showed more spreadsheets. You spent everything on a beach house, an imported car, and trips. There's not a penny left to pay back. The reality crashed down on Michael like a ton of bricks. His best friend, the person he trusted most in the world, had betrayed him in the lowest way possible. And the young woman he had scorned and publicly humiliated was the one trying to save him. Mrs. Barbara, who had watched the whole scene in silence, stepped closer to Jasmine and took her hand. Thank you, she whispered. You did what I should have done a long time ago. Robert, realizing there was no way to deny the evidence anymore, tried to slip out of the room quietly. But Michael stopped him. Where do you think you're going? Michael, let's talk calmly. We've been friends for 20 years. We were friends, Michael corrected him, his voice ice cold. You're fired. And I'm pressing criminal charges for embezzlement. You can't do this to me. I can and I will. Michael pointed to the door. Get out before I call security. Robert left humiliated, under the stares of all the employees who had gathered to watch the confrontation. 20 years of friendship destroyed in minutes by greed and betrayal. When the room finally fell silent, Michael turned to Jasmine. For the first time since she had joined the company, he truly looked her in the eyes. He began, but the words seemed inadequate. You need to cancel that contract immediately, Jasmine said, still focused on saving the company. Those men aren't investors. They're loan sharks with interest rates that will crush Johnson Imports in 6 months. Michael ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of all his mistakes. How can I cancel? I already signed. I already took the money. You have 24 hours to back out, Brian explained. It's the law. Any loan agreement can be cancelled within 1 business day after signing. But then I won't have the money to save the company, Michael muttered, defeated. Not necessarily. Jasmine stepped closer. I can show you a plan to restructure the company without loan sharks. Michael looked at her with equal parts skepticism and hope. What kind of plan? Give me a real chance, not as an intern who serves coffee, but as a qualified professional. 24 hours to analyze the whole situation and present a viable proposal. Michael hesitated. His whole life had been built on privilege and prejudice. Accepting help from a young, poor black woman went against everything he'd learned about social hierarchies. But he was also desperate enough to try anything. What if it fails? If it fails, I'll be no worse off than I am now, Jasmine replied with a bitter smile. And you can always go back to the loan sharks tomorrow. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, back to the story. Michael took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. Fine, you have 24 hours. Jasmine felt a mix of relief and panic. Now it was in her hands to save a company with decades of history and dozens of jobs at stake. I'll need access to all the financial records, she said, and authorization to contact suppliers and clients. Mrs. Barbara can help with that. Michael glanced at the secretary, who nodded. And I'll also need to work through the night. Can I stay here in the office? Michael hesitated again. Letting an employee stay alone in the building went against all security protocols. I'll stay with her, Mrs. Barbara offered. I want to see this company saved too. And I can help with the technical side, Brian added. No charge. Consider it a favor for an NYU business school classmate. Michael looked around at the 3 unlikely allies his company had found, an intern he had dismissed, a secretary he had ignored for years, and an unknown accountant who had appeared like a guardian angel. All right, he finally said. I'll cancel the contract with those men first thing tomorrow. You have until 5 in the afternoon to show me an alternative. When Michael left, the 3 exchanged glances. They had less than 20 hours to come up with a plan to save Johnson Imports. Where do we start? Asked Mrs. Barbara. Jasmine looked at the documents scattered across the table and then at the empty office around them. From the beginning, let's understand exactly what the company's real situation is. No lies, no manipulations, just the plain, hard truth. By 8 in the evening, when the building was completely empty except for the 3 of them, Mr. Walter appeared for his security rounds. Are you staying all night? The guard asked. We are, Mr. Walter, Jasmine replied. We're trying to save the company. Oh, I see, the man smiled. Then you'll need some strong coffee. There's a machine downstairs. I can get it for you. That would be great, Mrs. Barbara thanked him. While Mr. Walter went to fetch coffee, the 3 divided the tasks. Brian would analyze the financial records and pinpoint exactly where the money had been lost. Mrs. Barbara would handle supplier and client contacts using her 20 years of experience at the company, and Jasmine would draft a viable restructuring plan. For the first few hours, the office was silent, except for the sound of calculators and pages turning. Gradually, the true state of Johnson Imports became clear. The debts totaled $2,400,000. Robert's embezzlement had drained nearly all the company's reserves, but there were still some valuable assets that could be leveraged, and several longtime clients who remained loyal to the Johnson brand. Look at this, Brian showed them a spreadsheet. The company has exclusive contracts with 5 Asian suppliers that are worth far more than the current debts. That's true, Mrs. Barbara confirmed. Those contracts were negotiated by Michael's grandfather in the 80s. They're unique in the American market. Jasmine studied the numbers and felt a spark of hope. Johnson Imports wasn't dead. It was just mismanaged and being stolen from within. What if we renegotiate all the debts, she suggested. Instead of trying to pay everything at once, we break it into smaller installments and use the company's cash flow to pay them off gradually. Will the creditors accept that? Brian asked. They will if the alternative is getting nothing, Jasmine replied. A bankrupt company pays no one, but a restructured company can pay everyone, even if it takes a little longer. Mrs. Barbara typed on the computer and pulled up a list of all the company's creditors. I know the owners of half these businesses personally, she said. I've worked here for 20 years. They trust me. Then you can be our ambassador, Jasmine suggested. Explain the situation and negotiate longer terms in exchange for a guarantee of full payment. By 2 in the morning, they had a rough draft of the plan. By 4, they had a detailed proposal. By 6, when Mr. Walter finished his shift, they had a complete restructuring plan that could save Johnson Imports without resorting to loan sharks or predatory loans. You did it, the guard said, impressed. You worked all night. We really did, Jasmine smiled, exhausted but hopeful. Now we just have to hope the boss accepts our proposal. At 8 in the morning, Michael arrived at the office, expecting to find 3 tired people and a makeshift plan. Instead, he found a professional 40-page presentation with charts, projections, and detailed strategies. Did you do all this in one night? He asked, flipping through the document. We did, Jasmine replied. And it works. We can save the company without loan sharks, without selling parts of it, and even create new jobs within 2 years. Michael read the plan with growing focus. With each page, his expression shifted from skepticism to admiration. These people had found solutions he hadn't even imagined were possible. How did you come up with this? He asked. By looking at the company as it really is, Brian answered. Not the way Robert made it seem in his fake spreadsheets. And by talking to people who truly know the business, Mrs. Barbara added. Long-time employees, suppliers, clients, everyone wants to see Johnson Imports survive. Michael reached the last page of the plan and found a proposal that left him speechless. Jasmine wasn't asking for a better job or a raise. She was offering to work as a consultant for 6 months, taking only a small percentage of the savings from the restructuring. Why would you do this? He asked, looking directly at Jasmine. Because this company has history, she replied. Because the people who work here deserve to keep their jobs, and because I believe everyone deserves a second chance. Michael felt a lump in his throat. This young woman he had humiliated was offering to save him, asking for nothing in return but the chance to prove her worth. And if I accept your plan, what's the guarantee it'll work? The same guarantee you'd have with the loan sharks, Jasmine smiled. None. But at least with our plan, if it fails, you won't owe money to criminals. Michael laughed, feeling something like hope for the first time in weeks. All right, he said. Let's try it your way. The next 3 months were the most intense in Johnson Imports' history. Jasmine effectively took over the company's financial management, while Michael focused on rebuilding trust with clients and suppliers. Mrs. Barbara became the bridge between the new management and longtime employees, explaining changes and reassuring the hesitant. The first challenge was convincing creditors to accept a payment plan. Jasmine and Mrs. Barbara personally visited each creditor, presenting the restructuring plan and showing how everyone would benefit from Johnson Imports' survival. You have 2 choices, Jasmine explained in every meeting. Try to get everything now and get nothing when the company goes under, or accept installments and be guaranteed every penny with fair interest. Most creditors, impressed by the transparency and professionalism, agreed. Within 6 weeks, all debts had been renegotiated with manageable terms. The second challenge was winning back lost suppliers. Michael had to swallow his pride and publicly admit to the company's management failures. But this time, instead of hiding the problems, he presented them alongside solutions. We made serious mistakes, he said in a video conference with executives from Eastern Trade. But we've identified the causes, held those responsible accountable, and implemented controls to ensure it won't happen again. The Asian partners, impressed by the honesty and detailed recovery plan, decided to give the partnership a second chance. The contract was renewed with stricter terms, but that wasn't an issue. The new management was committed to total transparency. During this time, Jasmine discovered that Johnson Imports' biggest problem wasn't the debts or the embezzlement. It was the lack of innovation. The company had grown comfortable with the same products and markets for decades, while smaller competitors gained ground with more modern ideas. "We need to diversify," she proposed during a weekly meeting. "We can't rely solely on traditional electronics. The market is changing." "Change how?" asked Michael. "Sustainability," answered Jasmine, presenting market research she had conducted. "Eco-friendly products, renewable energy, green technology. It's the future of the import market." Michael hesitated. Change always made him nervous, especially after nearly losing everything. "Wouldn't that be too risky? We're just starting to recover." "Staying still is riskier," Jasmine insisted. "In 5 years, anyone not in the green market will be out of the market altogether." Barbara, who had witnessed market shifts over her 2 decades with the company, agreed with Jasmine. "She's right, Michael. I've seen this before. Companies that don't adapt disappear." Michael decided to trust his team's judgment once more, the same team that had saved his company. Johnson Imports began importing solar panels, small wind turbines, and clean tech products. The shift was an immediate success. Within 2 months, the Sustainable Products division accounted for 20% of the company's revenue. By 6 months, it was 40%. "How did you know?" Michael asked Jasmine one afternoon, reviewing the record-breaking sales reports. "Because I study the market," she replied. "Not just past numbers, but future trends. And because I talk to people of all ages and backgrounds. When you only surround yourself with people like you lose sight of what's happening in the real world." That answer made Michael reflect on how many opportunities he had missed over the years by living in a bubble of privilege. How many brilliant ideas he had dismissed simply because they came from people he considered beneath him. By the end of the 6th month, Johnson Imports had not only paid off all renegotiated debts, but also hired 15 new employees and opened a branch in Chicago. What had seemed like the end of the company became the start of a new era of sustainable growth. It was during the monthly all-hands meeting that Michael made a decision that surprised everyone. "I have an important announcement," he said, standing at the front of the makeshift auditorium in the office common area. "As you know, our company faced a serious crisis 6 months ago. We nearly lost everything due to mismanagement and betrayal by people we trusted." The employees listened in silence. Everyone remembered the uncertain days when rumors of mass layoffs had spread through the halls. But one person identified the problems and created solutions that not only saved us but made us stronger, Michael continued. "Someone I, to my eternal shame, treated with disdain and prejudice." Jasmine, seated in the front row, felt her face grow warm. She hadn't expected to be singled out like this. "Jasmine Williams started here as an intern. I saw her as just another poor young woman looking for a chance. I didn't bother to learn about her qualifications, her determination, or her intelligence. I judged by appearances and nearly ruined my company because of that foolish bias." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. It wasn't often that Michael admitted mistakes publicly. "That's why I'm announcing today that Jasmine Williams is our new Director of Innovation and Strategic Development. She will guide our company into the future because she's already proven she sees opportunities where others see only obstacles." The applause was spontaneous and long-lasting. Mrs. Barbara had tears in her eyes, proud to have helped create that historic moment. Jasmine stood up, emotional yet firm. "Thank you for your trust," she said, her voice echoing through the auditorium. "But I want to make it clear. This victory isn't just mine, it belongs to everyone who believed we could be better. It belongs to Mrs. Barbara, who supported me when I was just a lost intern. It belongs to Brian, who dropped his commitments to help us. It belongs to Mr. Walter, who brought us coffee during the most important night of our lives." She paused, looking at every face in the room. "And it also belongs to Mr. Michael, who had the courage to admit his mistakes and change. Many people have prejudices, but few have the humility to recognize when they're wrong and do things differently." Michael felt his eyes well up. That young woman he had humiliated was being generous enough to forgive him publicly. "From now on," Jasmine continued, "our company will be a place where what matters is competence, dedication, and honesty, not skin color, last names, or addresses on IDs. We'll be better because we'll give people chances to be better." The applause grew even louder. Long-time employees hugged the newer ones, creating a sense of unity the company hadn't seen in years. After the meeting, Michael approached Jasmine. "I'll never be able to fully apologize for what I did to you," he said, "but I can promise I've learned my lesson." "We all make mistakes," Jasmine replied. "What matters is having the humility to learn and change, and you've shown that humility." "There's one thing I need to know," Michael hesitated. "Why did you stay? After everything I said, after how I treated you, why didn't you leave?" Jasmine smiled, remembering her mother in the hospital and all the hardships her family had faced. "Because giving up wasn't an option for me," she said. "When you're born poor in America, you learn early that you'll have to work twice as hard for half the opportunities, so you develop a stubbornness no prejudice can break. And if I hadn't changed my mind, if I'd kept ignoring your ideas, then I would have found another way to save this company," Jasmine answered without hesitation, "because there were good people here who deserved to keep their jobs. And because I learned long ago that when you do the right thing, the universe conspires in your favor." Michael smiled, finally understanding why his company had been saved by someone he'd tried to destroy. 6 months later, Johnson Imports was awarded Company of the Year by the U.S. Asian Trade Council. Jasmine, now 23, became the youngest executive to receive the Business Innovation Award in the ceremony's history. On the day of the event, she arrived wearing the same brown blouse she'd worn on her first day of work. Not for lack of options, her new salary allowed for much nicer clothes, but to remind everyone that a person's worth isn't in their clothes or social background. Her mother, Mrs. Patricia, sat in the audience, her diabetes finally under control thanks to the health plan the company now offered employees' families. Her father, Mr. Harold, had left his night shift job as a doorman to work in logistics at Johnson Imports, where his life experience became invaluable knowledge about security and organization. "When I first joined this company," Jasmine said in her acceptance speech, "many people saw me as someone who didn't belong here. Today, this same company is proof of how talent can flourish when given fair opportunities." She paused, looking at Michael in the crowd. "We all have our prejudices. The difference lies in having the courage to question them when we realize we're wrong. Today, our company doesn't hire just based on diplomas or family connections. We hire for potential, dedication, and the willingness to build something better." The packed auditorium rose in applause. In the front row, Mrs. Barbara cried with pride, knowing she had witnessed one of the most beautiful transformations of her professional life. After the ceremony, during the reception, Michael Johnson approached Jasmine Williams. "You know what impresses me most about all this," he said. "What?" "You could have sued me, exposed my prejudice publicly, destroyed my reputation, but you chose to educate me instead of punishing me." Jasmine smiled, remembering the conversation she'd had with her mother in the hospital months earlier. "My mother always told me revenge is poison we swallow hoping the other person dies. I preferred turning your ignorance into a lesson. It was far more satisfying to see you change than to watch you suffer. And now, what are your plans for the future?" "To keep growing," Jasmine replied. "The company, my career, and especially our ability to give opportunities to talented people who just need a chance." "You mean?" "That's right. We're creating a paid internship program for young people from underserved communities. We'll be the company I wish had existed when I was a teenager and thought I'd never get opportunities." Michael smiled, knowing he was witnessing the birth of something much bigger than a simple business recovery. He was seeing the beginning of a quiet revolution where skill and character would matter more than social background. "You know what I'm going to do?" he said. "I'll tell our story in every business talk I give, so other executives learn what I did, that prejudice isn't just morally wrong, it's economically foolish. And I'll keep working to prove that when you give real opportunities to talented people, they always find ways to exceed your expectations," Jasmine added. That night, as she rode the subway home, still preferring public transit over the car she could now afford, Jasmine reflected on everything that had happened. She had started as a humiliated, dismissed intern. Now she was a director at a thriving company, responsible for dozens of jobs and an inspiration to young people across the country. But what made her proudest wasn't the titles or the salary. It was knowing she had turned prejudice into opportunity, resentment into growth, and despair into hope. When she reached South Bronx, she walked the same streets of her childhood, now with a completely different perspective. She hadn't run from her roots. She had turned them into strength, proving that where you're born doesn't determine how far you can go. At her doorstep, she found several neighbors waiting to congratulate her. News of her award had spread quickly through the community. "Jasmine," shouted Mrs. Dorothy from next door, "you're the pride of our block." "You showed us we can dream big," said Mr. George, the baker on the corner. Jasmine hugged each one, knowing her victory meant much more than personal success. It was proof that talent exists everywhere, especially where you least expect to find it. Inside, her parents were watching the news coverage of the award on TV. "Sweetheart," said Mrs. Patricia, holding her hands, "you fulfilled a dream we didn't even know we could have. And you did it without forgetting where you came from," added Mr. Harold. "You're still our Jasmine." That night, lying in the same bed she'd slept in throughout her childhood, Jasmine planned her next steps. Johnson Imports was just the beginning. He wanted to create a network of companies committed to fair opportunities, where potential mattered more than privilege. He also thought about writing a book telling his story, to inspire other young people not to give up on their dreams, even when the whole world seemed to conspire against them. But above all, he thought about the responsibility he now carried. Every decision he made from then on would influence not only his own life, but also the lives of all the young people who saw him as proof that it was possible to succeed through hard work and determination. End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this inspiring story? Do you believe Jasmine made the right choices by choosing education over revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.